The image you're looking at has no particular significance other than an expression of beauty. One of the topics that we will be addressing in this lecture and that you'll be reading about in the first chapter of your textbook. During the artistic and political revolution in Europe known as the Renaissance, which began in the 15th century, educated people became interested in learning about the cultures of ancient Greece and Rome, the classical tradition, believing that only through the study of classical art, literature, and philosophy could a person become fully human. These subjects, or as we referred to them, disciplines, became known as the humanities. Specifically, in your textbook, if you look in the table of contents, Part 2 of our study focuses on a variety of disciplines within the humanities. You can see a list there. So eventually, the culture of Western Europe was included in the humanities studies. Western Europe's cultural achievements were seen as an outgrowth of the legacy of classical Greece and Rome. Today, the humanistic tradition is no longer considered limited to a certain time, culture, or gender. This book considers the creative and intellectual expressions of each individual as a valid part of the study of the humanities. In its broadest sense, the humanities offers a safe haven in a turbulent time, an inspiring opportunity to study who we are collectively and as human beings individually. The study of the humanities combines critical thinking. We'll talk a bit more about that in relation to Chapter 2. And also aesthetic appreciation. A little more on that definition as we move along. The humanities inspire open-mindedness. Exploring the arts and ideas of other cultures allows us to understand that they are part of us and that we are part of them. The humanities are timeless, and this book's primary mission is to allow students to discover this renewable resource that is constantly being reinvented and rediscovered. As an example, the difference between, say, economics and humanities. The former tells us that our wants are insatiable, but resources are limited. Hence, there must always be scarcities that drive the economy. The latter, the humanities, tells us that its resources are unlimited, but we don't always want enough. In Chapter 1, you will encounter some text on these particular gifts of the humanities, and I'd like to introduce you to each one and make a couple of comments about them individually. Beauty, an experience that gives us an aesthetic pleasure, enjoying something or someone for its own sake. That's what we mean when we talked about aesthetic pleasure. Pleasure in something or someone that one deems beautiful. What's considered beautiful, however, varies from culture to culture, from time to time. To increase our aesthetic pleasure in beauty, we would do well to experience many viewpoints of the beautiful and be open to a variety of definitions of that which is beautiful. The two photos in your book you may have seen already of Oprah Winfrey and one of Ann Curry represent different ethnic and cultural heritages, yet both women share a reputation for beauty. I'm sure you're familiar with this image, a woman named Mona Lisa who shares a reputation for beauty. Serves as a good example for us to discuss the relative merits and the subjective nature of the concept of beauty. Mona Lisa, this portrait was painted by Leonardo da Vinci during the Renaissance in the 16th century. This particular discussion point, one of many or several that we will encounter through our PowerPoint lectures as well as in our class discussion, will be extended a bit further, and primarily during the classroom discussion time. So take a look at it now. We'll talk a bit more about it in class. The next on that list of gifts of the humanities is beautiful movement, perceived perfection of the human body in motion. As in the skilled movements of dancers, in this case, or athletes perhaps, like a tennis player moving gracefully across the court, or a gymnast on a balance beam. Creating artwork featuring ballerinas gave the French painter Edouard Degas aesthetic pleasure. Looking at his artwork, or moving for the sake of movement, or watching others do the same, gives us a sense of aesthetic pleasure as well. Next on the list, language. The humanities helps us to appreciate ingenious phrasing and offers us models of how language can be expertly manipulated. Using language with brilliance and flair helps to identify us as rational, thinking, intelligent human beings whose opinions are worth hearing. And like the beautiful, apt language is a reward in itself. Moving from language to ideas, words that we use help us transform our intuitions, our feelings, into exciting ideas and concepts. If we read widely enough in the humanities, we absorb both great language and great ideas. They are resources by which we can develop our own thinking skills. We are helped particularly by becoming acquainted with major models of thought, such as the Socratic analysis of justice, the Platonic forms, and so on and so forth. And then finally on this list, a deeper sense of the past. Through the humanities, we may immerse ourselves in the experiences of those who came before us, gaining a better understanding of what living is all about. Without a sense of the past, we cannot fully understand our world today, nor can we gain a wider and broader vision for our future. I like to speak of what we do in the classroom as not just a discussion but a conversation among those who are present, but also taking into account those who are not present, but the ideas conveyed in an earlier time in a different place are with us, and we're entering into that conversation that has been going on for a very long time and will continue to. The images you see here by Leonardo da Vinci, one taken presumably to be the first, a self-portrait, and the second is called Vitruvian Man. It may be familiar to you, as is the painting Mona Lisa. It stands, though, specifically as a visual reference to the ancient saying, man is the measure of all things. We'll talk perhaps a bit more about that in class. Another discussion point, though, asks us, do we have a modern equivalent of Leonardo da Vinci, a Renaissance man? A man or woman with an incredible range of interests and achievements? How can we seek to be more like a Renaissance person or an infinite person? Again, questions to think about that we will talk about when we gather together in class. And then always at the end of each chapter you will see a list of key terms. Most of these lists are longer than this one, and I'll try to cut that down a bit for you when possible. But in the case of chapter 1, this is the complete list. But if you look in your text at the end, you'll see not only the list, but the definitions, but of the terms, but the definitions. So take a look at that section always, and make sure that you read and familiarize yourself with each key term. And then the discussion points again, you will see and we will use as the basis of our discussion. This particular image is not in your textbook, but I added it because I think it's an appropriate modern image that is fairly well known, that will help us discuss that previous point about the subjectivity of beauty. And then again, the questions that that I just read, we will discuss. Finally, and this also is a section you'll see at the end of your chapter, I think just before the key terms, learning objectives, and the heading is there. Having read and carefully studied the chapter, you should be able to do the following things. So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in class.